So I picked this door up this morning from a property where the tenants have kicked the door in because the lock was stuck and someone was stuck in the room, so they just booted it in. Now, unusually this will be the first ever door I've actually brought away, and I'm going to cut it and fit all the furniture to it and then paint it in my little workshop here. I think, yeah, every other door I've ever done has always been fitted on the job. But anyway, for reasons I won't go into, I've brought this door away with me. Now, I took a small video of how it shuts. Now, the gap around this door is actually quite even. It's a tiny bit more than I'd like at the top, but I decided I'd compensate for that when I cut the new door. I thought it would be a good idea to do, I'll do it with the most basic tools I've got. So anyone going to have a go at doing a DIY door at home could have a go. And rather than hanging it in the frame like I would do, if your door fits nicely the one you're replacing, you could always use it as a template. Really wouldn't be the end of the world if you're not going to ever do many doors. So I've picked up like for like door from Wicks's, 30 quid I think it was. And yeah, right, let's crack on. So when you buy a new door, when you're in the shop, it's always a good idea to look down the length of it and just check it straight. And it actually looks a little bit bowed on this shot, but it is straight. It must be the camera angle. But yeah, some doors could be really badly bowed and you don't want any part of them. And then when you go to hang the door, look on the top and there'll be a side that usually says lock or an L. This is the side where you're going to need your lock, because these doors are basically just a bit of batten around the outside and the rest is egg cup, and there'll be a bit of extra wood where the lock's going to go to take the handles. So it's quite important that you make sure you put the lock on the right side. Usually in the instructions, let me see, is there instructions? Oh yeah, so it tells you the height of the log block on the instructions as well. Well, to be honest, I think this might be the first time I've looked at the instructions on a door ever. But anyway, yeah, they have them. So I've got the old door lying on top of the new door, and the most important edge for straight is the hinge edge, because that's the side it hangs on, and that fits perfectly flat. As I say, this is not the way I would have ever hung a door before. I usually hang the door into the frame, but I think it would be a good way for a DIY person to do it. As you can see, it's nice and flush there. As I go down, you can see where they've shaved off nearly a quarter of an inch off the old door, because you can see the extra on the new door obviously. As I say, and the bottom's all fine. Now, looking at the way the door hung in the old door, this edge here did have slightly more of a gap than I would generally leave. I usually go for about a 2p piece, which is what I was taught. So I'm guessing the reason the gap was a little bit more was to make it look nice. So if you imagine, if I leave the top, which is flush, the same, and add an extra mil or two to that there, when it goes back in the door, it's gonna not look straight. So that's why he obviously shaved off, just to make the gap look consistent. Again, this is the reason why you would always hang a door into the opening if you could, but sometimes for a DIY person, it would be much easier if you're happy with the way the old door hung, just to draw around it and cut the door accordingly. So just to make sure, as you can see, the old lock and lock written on the top of the new door. So I'll mark this up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave just a tiny bit. I'll mark probably I'm probably going to go about there and take that to nothing. So the next step is to plane the door off. This was the only tool I couldn't think of a compromise for. So if you haven't got a plane, a cheap corded one, you could borrow one perhaps off of a neighbour or someone. I'm sure someone could lend you a plane, but this was, as I say, the only thing I could think of that I couldn't think of a compromise. I think maybe I'd been able to cut it down with a handsaw and sand it up, but it would have been a fuss, and I think it would be, well, stupid and well out of the realm of a DIY person anyway to use a saw like that. So when you're happy with your planing, just give the edges a light sanding with some sandpaper. The reason you do this is, one, so you don't cut your hands on the edges, obviously whilst the door is hanging and in use, because it can be quite sharp, and two, it helps take paint when you come to paint your door. If we're happy the door's been planed exactly to the size that we want, we lay the old door on top of the new door, and with a straight edge or a square we'll mark exactly where the hinges need to go, so that when we hang it back in the frame it fits exactly as it did before. And we're also going to mark exactly where the lock goes, so all being well we don't have to adjust anything in the frame when it goes back in. With the centre of the old lock marked in the old door, we'll get our new snick and we'll just place it on top of the door flush with the edge, so we can mark exactly where we're going to drill the holes for the spindle. So the hinge, we're going to hang the piece, you can see the little slots in there. I always put them on the door, and I always have the solid ones, 3 with the knuckles on, always goes on the frame, because I think the frame takes the weight rather than the other way around. Having said that, I think it's much of a much really, and it really wouldn't make any difference in the world. So normally, this is my little router. This is how I would cut my hinges in, just by hand, no guides or anything, easy enough. If I'm not using my router, I'll use my chisels. These are all lovely and sharp, but as we're going to do a DIY one for people who haven't got the best tools, we're going to use these chisels here. Now these chisels here I bought in, I've still got a couple dotted around, in about 1985, 1986. These two are kept in my toolbox permanently, and I just use them for smacking old bits of wood, anything really. So they're not sharp, but what I will do, which I'm guessing most people's chisels won't be sharp, I'm just going to give it a little buff or a bit of sandpaper, clean the bottom off, and it'll make it just a little bit sharper than it should be, and we'll see how we get along with that. So, when you have your hinge, if you look at it like that, so you can see that, you can see there, it's very difficult to get it on the camera, but they're not actually square. So you've got to imagine when you hang it in the door, they'll be shut like that. That's the depth you would normally cut the hinge. You'd split that in half, and that's the depth you would go. Like this would make it bind and be too tight. Oh, that's better. So you can see now. So you can see now that it's at an angle. So that wouldn't fit in the door frame nice. So you just literally open it just slightly. And that's how it will be shut square into the door. So you split that. So it's the width of the hinge and half again probably. If you're not using a router and you're going to cut the hinges in with chisels, you'll need to mark the face of the door, the depth of the hinge that is, so you don't have a raggedy edge. Now I will usually use my marking gauge. You can get wooden ones with little nails in them, but if you haven't got one of them, we should just use a ruler and a knife just to make do. To mark that hinge out on the door, we'll just turn it upside down, push it up tight to the door, and just draw a clean pencil line around. And as I said, if we're not using a marking gauge or scriber, we'll just mark half of the width of the hinge there and just scribe that on the side of the door with our pencil. And then very carefully hold a ruler on your line and just mark a little mark with a sharp knife. This will help when you chisel out not to have a raggedy edge. So now we're going to start chiseling out this hinge. So we place the chisel exactly on the top and the bottom line and give it 2, 3 or 4 good hard taps. Going this way on the grain will be the hardest bit for not such a sharp chisel. Then we go down the main edge. We'll place the chisel just slightly back from the line. It's difficult to see on this camera angle, but that is in fact just a tiny whisker in from the line. As when you hit the chisel, you'll see the chisel automatically just move to the line, keeping it exactly where you want it to be. Now you won't have to hit down this edge quite as hard as the top and bottom because it goes with the grain. Now normally with a sharp chisel I would then go into the side of the door and give it a few taps just to get the edge going where we've scribed it. But if your chisels are not the sharpest in the world, we're going to just do it this method here. Now again, we're going to hit it 2, 3, 4 times to get down to the line that we've marked down the edge, and we do this consistently all the way down the hinge. And then using the edge of the chisel, we can just knock off what the upstands and we'll take most of it out. And then really it's just a matter of cleaning it all up. Now as I'm going into the edge here, if your chisel was super sharp, it would just shave it off and that would be job done. But with a blunt chisel, you're just going to have to be patient now and just keep cleaning it up until it's all nice. I normally use these trend hinge drill bit guides which perfectly center your pilot hole in the middle of the hinge. Now what this alleviates is the hinge being pulled forward away from your recess. So if you haven't got one of these, what you need to do is mark your holes and very carefully do a pilot just towards the back of the hole so that the hinge is pulled in towards the door rather than accidentally moving out. So as the pilot hole footage has been mislaid, lost, deleted, we'll just skip that step and go straight on to screwing up the hinges, which is straightforward enough, no dramas there. So drilling out for the lock is straightforward enough. Mark the drill depth with a bit of tape. Most door snicks are around 32mm spade bits, so just keep the drill bit as straight as you possibly can. some of the square snicks may need widening just slightly with your chisel. And with the door snick in your freshly drilled out hole, just carefully mark out a nice sharp line around the edges, and we're going to chisel out using exactly the same method as before. Nice and tight at the top and bottom of the snick, and just slightly in when you do the sides, going with the grain. Now you need to be even more careful when you're doing the edges, because if you hit the chisel too hard, you'll split the wood and tear the door out. So you need to be super careful and just go light taps with the edges and just slowly whittle the door out. Especially if you're using a blunt chisel, just take your time with this step. So earlier you saw me mark out the spindle on one side of the door, and this is just basically transferring the line over to the other side so we can drill a hole each side rather than go right the way through and risk going off the line slightly. When drilling out the spindle hole, you don't want to make it too tight, but on the same screw you don't want to make it too big. So I generally just check against the handle just to make sure that the handle is going to plenty cover my hole and the spindle will have plenty of room to maneuver if your drilling is just slightly off. Just carefully drill through one side at a time. So we pop the snick in, drill a couple of pilot holes and then pop the screws in. So that's the snick all nice and fitted and onto the handle. Now holding the handle so it looks straight with the lead edge of the door, mark the 4 holes with your sharp pencil and then do a pilot hole in one of the holes. Then you can pop one of the screws in, tighten that up and hold the handle in its nice straight place, and you can then pilot hole each one of the holes individually and screw it up. And the reason you do them one at a time, or at least do the first 2, is if you was to pilot hole all 4 of your holes up when you first mark them, there's a very good chance the handle will be a little bit skewy. So do them 1 screw, 2nd screw, then you can do 3 and 4. Took the door back to the job and luckily enough it fitted perfectly. So I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and the usual, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.